The Elder Scrolls has dozens of factions, from ancient magical orders to underground assassin cults to full-blown continental armies. Some have been around for thousands of years. Some barely survived a single era. Today, I'm breaking down every major faction in the series, what they stand for, how they rose, and why most of them fell apart, starting with the one faction that just wanted to hit things for money: the Fighters Guild. In a world full of Daedric conspiracies, necromancer cults, and elves trying to unmake reality itself, the Fighters Guild is refreshingly simple. No gods, no ancient prophecies, just regular people swinging swords at other people's problems for coin. And honestly, that's kind of beautiful. The guild was founded during the Second Era to consolidate Tamriel's scattered mercenaries into one professional organization with standardized contracts and a ranking system. Before it existed, hiring a sellsword was basically a coin flip between getting a competent warrior and getting some guy named Grelid who'd rob you the second you turned around. The guild fixed that by creating accountability and a reputation worth protecting. Here's what made the Fighters Guild genuinely unique. It was completely meritocratic. Any citizen could join regardless of birth, bloodline, race, or social standing. You didn't need noble heritage or magical talent. You needed a weapon and the willingness to use it. Kill the rats, clear the cave, escort the merchant, move up a rank. Simple. By the Third Era, the guild had permanent halls in most major cities across every imperial province, offering training, lodging, equipment, and a genuine career path. One of the most accessible institutions in the entire empire, which is remarkable, considering most organizations in Tamriel require you to either be born into the right family or sell your soul to something with too many eyes. And then, the Blackwood Company showed up. During the events of Oblivion, this rival mercenary outfit started aggressively undercutting the Fighters Guild on contracts across Cyrodiil. Worse, their secret weapon was hissed sap, a substance they were feeding to operatives that sent them into uncontrollable berserker rages. Their mercenaries were literally drugged out of their minds, massacring civilians on jobs and not even remembering it afterward. The guild had to infiltrate the Blackwood Company, expose the operation, and destroy their heist tree to shut the whole thing down. The most straightforward faction in Tamriel nearly got run out of business by a bunch of juiced-up psychopaths who couldn't tell a bandit from a farmer. The guild survived, but after the Oblivion Crisis, the organization hemorrhaged influence to military institutions more tightly aligned with the Empire's restructured power apparatus. Turns out, when the world nearly ends, governments prefer giving contracts to organizations they directly control rather than independent guilds that just spent the last year getting outcompeted by drug-fueled maniacs, which is, fair. The Fighters Guild's collapse is basically the most relatable institutional failure in Elder Scrolls history. No cosmic betrayal, no Daedric interference. Just a rival company undercutting them and a changing market that left them behind. If that doesn't sound like every mid-sized business that's ever existed, I don't know what does. But if the Fighters Guild's downfall was painfully mundane, the Mages Guild managed to implode in a way that was significantly more dramatic and involved a lot more necromancy. The Mages Guild. Vanus Galerion is one of the most important figures in Elder Scrolls history, and nobody gives him enough credit. This is a guy who was trained by the Psijic Order, the most exclusive and secretive magical organization on the entire continent, and his response was to look around at all that hoarded knowledge and say, yeah, no, everyone should have this. In 2E230, Galerion founded the Mages Guild as a direct challenge to the Psijic Order's monopoly on magical education. His charter proposed something genuinely radical. Any citizen of Tamriel who could afford the fees could learn magic, not just high elves, not just nobility, anyone. This was the magical equivalent of inventing the public library, and the established hierarchy absolutely hated it. Getting the charter approved required sign-off from both the Psijic leadership and King Rylus XII of Firsthold. The fact that it passed at all is kind of a miracle, and the guild he built wasn't some loose collection of wizards sharing notes. A supreme council of 6 archmages oversaw regional masters and local chapter leaders across the entire continent. The Arcane University in the Imperial City became the crown jewel of the operation, basically the Harvard of blowing things up with your mind. At its peak, the Mages Guild had chapters in virtually every major city in Tamriel. But here's where it gets complicated. The necromancy question haunted this guild from the beginning. When you tell everyone they can learn magic, eventually someone's going to ask about the really dangerous stuff. Enter Mannimarco, the king of worms, who wasn't just practicing necromancy in some basement. He was building an entire rival organization dedicated to raising the dead and harvesting souls. Galerion committed everything to stopping him. The final battle ended with Galerion sacrificing his own life to defeat the necromancer's forces. The founder of the Mages Guild died fighting the exact kind of magical corruption his institution was supposed to prevent, which is, not ideal. And here's the kicker. Even after Galerion's sacrifice, the necromancy debate never went away. It just festered inside the guild like an infection for centuries, with factions arguing endlessly about where to draw the line on forbidden knowledge. Then, the Oblivion Crisis happened, and everything fell apart. After Daedric gates started opening across Tamriel and demons poured into every major city, public opinion turned violently against mages. People didn't care about the distinction between a guild wizard selling healing potions and a necromancer raising corpses. Magic was magic, and magic had just nearly destroyed the world. The guild fractured into two successor organizations: the Synod, which took a hard conservative stance and tried to play nice with the Empire, and the College of Whispers, which maintained a much more permissive attitude toward forbidden arts. Neither came close to achieving the unified authority of the original Mages Guild. Galerion built an institution that spanned the known world, and within a few centuries of his death, it split in half over the exact question he tried to answer: who gets to use dangerous knowledge? Turns out, nobody agreed on the answer. But if the Mages Guild tore itself apart over philosophy, wait until you hear about the faction that turned crime itself into an art form: the Thieves Guild. Most factions in Tamriel claim to serve some noble purpose. The Thieves Guild doesn't bother. It exists to steal things, and it's somehow more functional than every legitimate institution on the continent. That's not a joke. An organization built entirely around crime developed a stricter ethical code than most governments, and it worked so well that every thief on Tamriel eventually copied it. Here's the thing: before the guild existed, thieves were a mess. You had hundreds of independent criminals all working against each other, stealing from the same targets, undercutting each other's fences, and occasionally just killing each other over territory. Nobody was making real money. It was like watching a room full of people fight over crumbs while ignoring the entire bakery. Then someone had what might be the most productive idea any criminal has ever had: organize the scattered thieves under a set of explicit rules. Never steal from a fellow member, never kill on the job, never steal from the poor. 3 rules. That's it. And overnight, theft went from chaotic individual crime to a coordinated profession with ethical standards that honestly put some merchant guilds to shame. But the real proof of concept came with how the guild embedded itself into legitimate power structures. This wasn't just pickpocketing and burglary. The guild built fence networks, bribed officials, and created an entire shadow economy that ran parallel to the real one. The aristocrats and merchant lords who controlled city economies eventually had to acknowledge that the guild was a force they couldn't just stamp out. They had to coexist. That's not theft. That's a hostile takeover with better peer. And the model spread everywhere. Nearly every Thieves Guild chapter across Tamriel traces its operational methods and philosophy back to those same core principles: the rules, the structure, the fence networks, all of it. Whoever set those original guidelines essentially franchised crime. Now, the system isn't foolproof. The Riften chapter in the 4th era proved that when their guildmaster, Mercer Frey, turned out to be the single worst leader in the guild's history, and the competition for that title is steep. Mercer murdered his predecessor, Gallus Desidenius. He stole the Skeleton Key, a Daedric artifact of immense power. He drained the guild treasury, and then, because apparently that wasn't enough, he framed an innocent member named Carlia for the whole thing. Hey, who robbed us blind and killed the boss? Definitely not me, the guy who is suspiciously wealthy all of a sudden. The guild nearly collapsed under his leadership. Contracts dried up, influence shrank, and members started wondering if maybe the organization was cursed. Which, not ideal for morale. But here's where it gets interesting. Once Mercer's betrayal was exposed and dealt with, the guild didn't just cover. It experienced a genuine renaissance. Influence expanded to cities as far away as Solitude, the treasury was restored, and the guild's reputation came back stronger than before. The corruption arc mirrors what happened with the Fighters Guild, but the Thieves Guild version has higher stakes, a better villain, and an ending that actually feels earned. The whole thing proves a weirdly optimistic point. Crime absolutely can pay, as long as you organize it properly and don't let one guy with a Daedric artifact ruin everything. But if you think the Thieves Guild operates in moral gray areas, wait until you hear about the faction that threw morality out the window entirely: the Dark Brotherhood. Most factions in Tamriel at least pretend to have noble intentions. The Dark Brotherhood doesn't even bother. This is a murder cult that also happens to be a business, and somehow that's not even the weirdest part about them. The Brotherhood didn't appear out of thin air. It splintered off from the Morag Tong, Morrowind's legally sanctioned Assassin's Guild. Yes, legally sanctioned. The Morag Tong operated with full government recognition, carrying out assassinations as a regulated public service, which is, not ideal, but at least there were rules. Problem was that the Morag Tong's influence started shrinking outside of Morrowind, and their rigid structure couldn't keep up with the growing demand for people who needed other people to stop being alive. So a splinter group broke away, and things got significantly darker. Here's where it gets weird. The Dark Brotherhood didn't just organize itself like a normal criminal enterprise. Sithis, a primordial force representing the void and chaos itself, allegedly manifested through a figure known as the Night Mother to establish the Brotherhood as an instrument of death and soul harvesting. The Night Mother is exactly what she sounds like: a corpse, a preserved ancient corpse kept in a coffin who whispers assassination contracts to a single chosen member called the Listener. The entire organization takes spiritual direction from a dead woman in a box. I don't know what to tell you. The genius of the Dark Brotherhood, if you can call it that, is how it merged religious fanaticism with cold commercial logic. Every kill was simultaneously a sacred offering to Sithis and a paid transaction. You didn't need political connections or noble blood to hire them. You just needed coin. A farmer who wanted his neighbor dead received the same professional courtesy as a noble plotting plotting against a rival. Assassination is a fully democratized service. Sithis doesn't discriminate. The organization's leadership structure reflected this blend of mysticism and management. The Black Hand sat at the top, one listener, chosen directly by the Night Mother, and 4 speakers who each oversaw their own group of silencers and executioners. It's a corporate board where the CEO takes orders from a talking corpse and middle management carries out the wet work. Standard stuff. Now, the Brotherhood's most consequential operation was also its messiest. The attempted assassination of Emperor Titus Mede II initially failed. Dramatically, the Brotherhood's sanctuary was nearly destroyed. Its members were hunted and the whole thing looked like a catastrophic embarrassment. But the Night Mother, apparently unbothered by the setback, established a new contract through a man named Amand Motier. The Brotherhood regrouped, infiltrated the Emperor's personal vessel, the Kataria, and finished the job. The Emperor of Tamriel killed aboard his own ship, a botched operation that somehow became the single most consequential assassination in modern Tamriel history. Here's the thing, though. Despite pulling off the kind of contract that should have cemented the Brotherhood's legend for centuries, the organization never fully recovered. The Oblivion Crisis had already gutted their leadership when members of the Black Hand were systematically assassinated from within. The Brotherhood that killed Emperor Mede was a shadow of what it had been at its peak. Fewer sanctuaries, fewer members, operating out of crumbling hideouts instead of the sprawling underground networks they once maintained. They proved they could still kill an emperor, but they couldn't rebuild what they'd lost. The Dark Brotherhood is what happens when you take religion, capitalism, and murder and smash them together until they're indistinguishable, sacred and transactional, devout and mercenary, a dying organization that can still reach the most powerful man on the continent. That contradiction is what makes them one of the most fascinating factions in Elder Scrolls, and easily the most unsettling. But if a murder cult operating in the shadows sounds dangerous, wait until you hear about the faction that operated in plain sight, standing directly behind the Emperor with swords drawn. The Blades. The Blades have the single best origin story of any faction in Elder Scrolls. And it's not even close, because they didn't start as bodyguards, they didn't start as spies. They started as dragon hunters from another continent. Before the Blades ever set foot on Tamriel, they were the Dragon Guard, an ancient order operating in Akavir during the First Era. Their entire purpose was hunting and killing dragons in the dragon's own homeland. That was the job description. Find dragons, kill dragons, repeat. And they were exceptionally good at it. Then the Akaviri invaded Tamriel, and the Dragon Guard came with them. When Emperor Raymond ultimately repelled the invasion, the surviving Dragon Guard didn't just scatter or disappear. They underwent one of the most dramatic career changes in Tamriel's history. These specialized dragon-killing warriors looked around, realized the dragon population on Tamriel was basically zero, and pivoted hard. They transitioned from elite monster hunters into the Empire's covert military force and secret service. Basically went from hunting the most dangerous creatures alive to becoming the ancient world's CIA. Here's where it gets really interesting. When Tiber Septim began his conquest of Tamriel in the late Second Era, the remnants of the Dragon Guard recognized him as Dragonborn. They emerged from relative obscurity, pledged their service, and under Septim, they officially became the Blades. Not just bodyguards, not just soldiers. They became the Emperor's personal guard, his elite military force, and his primary intelligence network, all rolled into one organization. Members operated across every province in Tamriel disguised as merchants, thieves, craftsmen, mages, and warriors. Your friendly neighborhood blacksmith could have been a Blades agent reporting directly to the Emperor. You'd never know. That was the point. For the entirety of the Third Era, the Blades operated as the most trusted organization in the Empire. Their loyalty wasn't to politics or policy. It was to the Dragonborn line itself. Every emperor in the Septim dynasty had the Blades watching their back, gathering intelligence, eliminating threats before they materialized. The organization had evolved so far from its origins that dragon slaying became a secondary footnote in their charter, something they technically still did, but almost never needed to. Then the Thalmor happened. During and after the Great War, the Aldmeri Dominion identified the Blades as one of the most dangerous threats to their plans for continental supremacy, and they weren't wrong. An intelligence network embedded in every province, loyal to the Empire above all else, operating with zero oversight? The Thalmor couldn't tolerate that, so they conducted targeted elimination operations, hunted Blades agents across Tamriel, killed them systematically. They even sent the severed heads of captured Blades agents to the Imperial City as a message, which is, not ideal. But the real killing blow wasn't a sword, it was a piece of paper. The White Gold Concordat of 4E175, the treaty that ended the Great War, included an explicit clause mandating the complete disbandment of the Blades. Centuries of service to the Dragonborn line, erased by a single line in a peace treaty. The Empire they'd dedicated their existence to protecting signed them away as a bargaining chip. By 4E201, the Blades had gone from a continent-spanning intelligence apparatus with agents in every city to exactly 2 people. Delphine, running an inn in Riverwood under a fake identity. Esbern, hiding in the sewers of Riften, half convinced the Thalmor would find him any day. That's it. 2 survivors of an organization that once protected emperors and shaped the fate of nations, trying to recruit new members and rebuild from literally nothing. Dragon hunters who became spies, who became bodyguards, who became fugitives. If that's not the best faction arc in Elder Scrolls, I don't know what is. But if the Blades represent an organization destroyed by political forces beyond its control, the next faction represents something stranger, a group so powerful they simply chose to disappear. The Psijic Order. Every faction we've covered so far thinks they're old. The Psijic Order looks at all of them the way a grandparent looks at a toddler trying to eat a crayon. This is the single most ancient magical organization in Tamriel's history, and they've spent most of that history making sure you know absolutely nothing about them. The Order originated in the Somerset Isles as a gathering of Altmer elders who dedicated themselves to preserving what they called the old ways. And when they say old, they mean it. These weren't mages studying dusty textbooks. They were preserving magical traditions and philosophical frameworks that predated most of Tamriel's civilizations entirely. Their whole mission was to protect this knowledge from cultural corruption and moral decline, which, if you think about it, is a polite way of saying they looked at the rest of the world and decided it wasn't good enough. Here's the thing. The Psijic Order didn't just gatekeep knowledge casually. They turned exclusivity into an art form. Rite Master Iakesis presided over the Order for over 3,000 years. 3,000. Most empires don't last 300, and during roughly 1,000 years of that tenure, the Order admitted exactly 17 new members. 17. That's not a faction. That's a dinner party. You have a better chance of getting struck by lightning while riding a horse backward than you do of getting a Psijic invitation, but their contributions to magical theory were enormous, even if they'd never admit it publicly. The Psijic Order is indirectly responsible for developing mysticism as an entire school of magic. They created the Cloven Duality, a philosophical framework exploring the relationship between order and chaos in magical theory, and they allegedly developed something called the Calling, a form of telepathic communication that allowed members to contact each other across vast distances without any conventional magical apparatus, just thinking at someone really hard, except it actually worked. They also took a hard stance on necromancy, outlawing it completely among their members. This wasn't just a policy preference. For the Altmer, ancestor spirits hold deep cultural and religious significance. Raising the dead wasn't just dangerous in their eyes. It was heretical. Desecration of the highest order. Now here's where it gets complicated. One of their own students, a mage named Vanus Galarian, looked at the Psijic Order's entire philosophy of hoarding magical knowledge for an impossibly small elite and said, what if we just didn't do that? Galarian proposed creating the Mages Guild, an organization that would offer magical education and services to basically anyone who could afford it. This was a direct challenge to everything the Psijic Order stood for. Their whole identity was built on restriction. Galarian wanted to blow the doors open, and the wildest part? Rite Master Iakesis proved the charter in 2E230. The leader of the most exclusive magical organization in history signed off on its exact opposite. Whether this was wisdom, resignation, or some kind of long game that nobody else understood, we genuinely don't know. But the Psijics watched their own student democratize everything they'd protected for millennia, and rather than fight it, they just let it happen. And then they disappeared. The Isle of Artaeum, the Psijic Order's home, vanished. Not metaphorically. The entire island ceased to exist in the physical world. It was gone for exactly 500 years before reappearing during the interregnum like nothing had happened. 500 years. That's not hiding. That's removing yourself from reality. The leading theory is that the Psijics possessed some form of temporal magic powerful enough to pull their island out of existence entirely, which is the kind of thing that makes you wonder what else they can do that nobody's ever seen. That's the unease with the Psijic Order. They're not threatening, they're not conquering, they're not even particularly interested in you. But they know things that the rest of Tamriel doesn't, and they've decided the best course of action is to simply not be here. An organization that can erase its own island from the map and come back half a millennium later like they just stepped out for groceries is not an organization you want to underestimate. But if ancient monks hiding on a disappearing island sounds detached from reality, the next faction is the exact opposite. Boots on the ground, swords drawn, and loyalty to the Emperor above all else, the Imperial Legion. The Imperial Legion is the faction everybody takes for granted. It's just there, like gravity or taxes. The massive military machine that held an entire continent together for centuries. And nobody really stops to think about how insane that is until the machine starts breaking down, which is exactly what happened. Here's the thing. The Legion didn't start as some grand institution with a noble charter and a mission statement. It started as Tiber Septim's conquest army around 2E854, a brutal wartime force designed to do one thing, take Tamriel by force. And it worked. Septim carved his way across the continent, and the army that helped him do it gradually evolved into something more permanent. What began as a conquest force became a garrison force, and what began as a garrison force became the single largest military organization Tamriel had ever seen. At peak strength, the Imperial Legion fielded multiple legions spread across every province on the continent, each one thousands of soldiers strong. That's not a military, that's an occupation, and the Legion was proud of this. They proclaimed themselves the most disciplined fighting force in Tamriel's history, and honestly, for a long time, they had the receipts to back it up. Service was open to all Imperial citizens, regardless of race, which was genuinely progressive for a continent where most factions wouldn't let you through the door unless you were the right species. When voluntary recruitment wasn't cutting it, the Empire just conscripted people from nearby cities, which is, not ideal, but it kept the numbers up. The Legion's primary job wasn't conquest, though. That's the part people get wrong. After Tiber Septim finished taking everything, the Legion pivoted to internal security, garrison duty, law enforcement, crushing rebellions before they got out of hand. Legions were stationed across all 9 provinces, keeping the peace in territories that didn't always want to be kept peaceful. The Empire wasn't building an army to invade new territory. It was building an army to keep the territory it already had from falling apart. And for centuries, that worked. The Legion maintained order, suppressed dissent, and projected enough power that most provinces didn't bother testing the Empire's patience. The system functioned because nobody could realistically challenge it. Then the Great War happened, and everything changed. The Aldmeri Dominion didn't just challenge the Legion. They exposed it. The Empire's finest soldiers, the most disciplined military force on the continent, suffered devastating losses across multiple fronts. Entire legions were destroyed in Hammerfell and Cyrodiil. Imperial forces were overwhelmed, retreating through hostile terrain while the Dominion pressed the advantage. This wasn't a tactical withdrawal. This was the moment the entire continent realized the Legion could lose. The white gold concordat that ended the war didn't help. The Empire signed away its dignity to stop the bleeding, banning Talos worship across Imperial territory and disbanding the Blades entirely. The Legion survived, technically, but its reputation took a hit it never recovered from. Provinces that had tolerated Imperial authority for centuries started asking a very uncomfortable question. If the Legion can't beat the Dominion, what exactly is it good for? By the Fourth Era, the answer was increasingly unclear. The Legion found itself fighting the Skyrim Civil War against the Stormcloaks, an insurgency born directly from the Empire's inability to protect its own people from Thalmor religious enforcement. The most powerful military in Tamriel's history was now struggling to hold a single province against its own citizens. Soldiers who should have been preparing for the next war with the Dominion were instead garrisoning Nordic cities and fighting Nords who used to serve alongside them. The Imperial Legion isn't dead, but it's cracking. The institution that held Tamriel together is now visibly struggling to hold itself together, stretched thin across too many fronts with too few resources and a population that's lost faith in the government it serves. The Legion's story isn't one of collapse, not yet. It's one of slow, grinding erosion, where every year the cracks get a little wider and the reinforcements get a little thinner. But if the Legion's decline is concerning, the faction responsible for that decline is downright terrifying. The Thalmor. Here's the thing about the Thalmor. For centuries, they were nobody. Literally, nobody. They existed as a fringe extremist group within Somerset Isle politics, screaming about Altmer supremacy while the rest of the political establishment politely ignored them. Think of that one guy at every town hall meeting who won't stop talking about fluoride in the water. That was the Thalmor for hundreds of years. And then, in the span of a single generation, they became the most dangerous faction on the entire continent. The Oblivion Crisis changed everything. When the Daedric invasions tore through Tamriel and the Empire proved utterly incapable of protecting its own provinces, the Thalmor saw their moment. They claimed credit for saving the Somerset Isles from the Daedric onslaught. Was this exaggerated? Almost certainly. But it didn't matter. The Altmer were terrified. The Empire had just demonstrated catastrophic weakness, and the Thalmor were the only ones saying, "We told you so." That kind of message lands differently when there are still Oblivion gates smoldering in your backyard. The political takeover was swift. The Thalmor consolidated power across the Somerset Isles, then turned outward. Around 4E29, they orchestrated the overthrow of imperial administration in Valenwood, forming the Third Aldmeri Dominion. Shortly after, they brought Elswere's Khajiit kingdoms to heel as client states, not allies, not partners, clients. In less than 30 years, the Thalmor went from political fringe group to the governing authority of 3 provinces, which is, not ideal if you're the Empire, but the Thalmor weren't interested in building a nice little elven coalition and calling it a day. They wanted war. In 4E171, they launched the Great War. By 4E174, the Aldmeri Dominion had thrown their entire military force at the heart of the Empire in a massive gamble, and to make sure the Empire understood exactly what they were dealing with, the Thalmor sent a gift to the Imperial capital. The severed heads of every Blades agent they'd captured and executed, dozens of them, packed up and delivered like a care package. Here are your spies back. We don't need them anymore. That's not a military tactic. That's a statement. The war ended with the white gold concordat Concordat. And if you think that sounds like a peace treaty, let me correct you. It was a list of demands the Empire was too broken to refuse. Talos worship was outlawed across all Imperial territory. The Blades were formally disbanded, and Thalmor Justiciars were granted permission to station themselves within Skyrim to enforce religious compliance. Foreign agents on Imperial soil, arresting Imperial citizens for praying to the wrong god. That's not peace. That's occupation with extra steps. But here's where it gets truly unsettling. The Thalmor didn't view the Concordat as a victory. They viewed it as Phase 1. Every piece of intelligence, every interaction with Thalmor leadership in Skyrim points to the same conclusion. The Concordat was never meant to be permanent. It was meant to buy time. Time to rebuild their military. Time to let the Empire rot from the inside. Time to let the Stormcloak Rebellion weaken Imperial forces even further. The Thalmor aren't waiting for peace to hold. They're waiting for the right moment to finish what they started. And that's what makes the Thalmor the perfect faction to end on. Every single organization we've talked about in this video, the Fighters Guild, the Mages Guild, the Thieves Guild, the Dark Brotherhood, the Blades, the Psijics, the Imperial Legion, every one of them is either dead, fractured, diminished, or in hiding. The Mages Guild split in two. The Blades were hunted to near extinction. The Psijic Order vanished entirely. And standing over all of it, patient and calculating, are the Thalmor, the faction that nobody took seriously for centuries. The faction that exploited every other faction's decline to claw their way to the top. Tamriel isn't at peace. It's in a countdown, and the Thalmor are the ones holding the clock. If you enjoyed this video and want to see every crime in Skyrim explained, click the video on the screen now.